Puedes bajar a los ojos. Para la proyección.
¿Ya? No, para mí no. Sí, ya le van a traer. Le van a traer. ¿Listo? ¿Ya? Bueno, buenas tardes con todas, con todos. Muchísimas gracias por estar acá. Es un honor para todos nosotros poder contar con su presencia. En este segundo día del séptimo Congreso de la Red de Ciencias Políticas y Relaciones Internacionales, que es un día muy especial donde tenemos una conferencia magistral por Amitabh Acharya, de quien en unos momentos vamos a escuchar. A nombre de la red CIPRI únicamente quiero reiterarles el agradecimiento por estar acá. Como sabrán, la red CIPRI es una red enfocada en trabajar alrededor de los temas de ciencias políticas y relaciones internacionales y que procura combinar los espacios para escuchar nuevas voces junto con expertos connotados dentro de estos campos. Y en esa perspectiva, pues, gracias al apoyo de la Universidad Andina, Simón Bolívar, en este año hacemos el séptimo congreso, quien es una confitriona de lujo, y también gracias al auspicio de la Facultad Latinoamericana de Ciencias Sociales, Flaxo, podemos contar esta noche acá con la presencia de Amitabh Acharya. Así es que únicamente con esto yo les quiero agradecer a todas, a todos por su presencia acá. Le quiero dar la palabra a Michelle Levy a nombre de la Universidad Andina.
Muchas gracias, Diego. Buenas tardes con todos, con todas. A nombre del rector de la Universidad Andina, Simón Bolívar, César Montaño Galarza, tengo el alto agrado y honor de darles la bienvenida a esta universidad, a esta casa de estudios que les acoge en esta tarde para presentar en el marco de del séptimo Congreso de la Red de Ciencia Política y Relaciones Internacionales esta conferencia magistral a cargo del profesor Amitabh Acharya de la American University de los Estados Unidos. Para nosotros es un honor, es un placer, Diego, acoger al evento en esta ocasión. Hoy estamos conmemorando los 30 años de la Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar, Sede Ecuador, pues es una universidad de posgrado que ofrece programas de maestría y doctorado. Para todos los que les interese, obviamente estamos abiertas, nuestras puertas están abiertas para todos ustedes. De igual forma, es realmente muy grato que la universidad tenga esta vocación de servicio a la comunidad y en esa lógica pueda dar paso a las manifestaciones tan importantes como esta conferencia del profesor Acharya. De paso agradecemos a la Facultad Latinoamericana de Ciencias Sociales representada por Raúl Salgado por haber permitido que el profesor Acharya venga al Ecuador, esté presente esta tarde aquí con nosotros y que podamos disfrutar y podamos comprender más de las relaciones internacionales en el mundo global directamente en formato presencial, quiero decir, y de esa forma pues aprovechar y plantear las preguntas que crean pertinentes después de la conferencia. La conferencia va a ser transmitida por YouTube o Facebook, va a estar transmitida en línea, así que después ustedes podrán mirarla y las veces que sean necesarias y tomar notas y hacer trabajos con todo el conocimiento que va a transmitir aquí el profesor Acharya. Nuevamente es un honor acoger este evento a la red CIPRI y sin más doy paso a mi colega Raúl Salgado de la Flaxo Ecuador para que presente al profesor Acharya. Muchas gracias.
Muchísimas gracias con todos. Buenas tardes con todos y todas. Permítame, por favor, presentar al profesor Acharya. El profesor Amitabh Acharya es profesor distinguido de la Escuela de Servicio Internacional de la American University en Washington, en la cátedra de la UNESCO sobre desafíos transnacionales. Ha sido el primer académico no occidental en ser electo como presidente de la Asociación de Estudios Internacionales ISA, ¿no? International Studies Association, que es una red global más grande y de mayor influencia en los estudios internacionales a nivel del planeta. Previamente, profesor Acharya fue profesor en la York University en Canadá y en la Universidad de Bristol en el Reino Unido, y actualmente es profesor honorario de la Rhodes University en Sudáfrica y profesor invitado en la Nankai University en China. También fue fellow en Harvard Center y en la Escuela de Gobierno del John F. Kennedy University, ¿no? Y en el Christensen Fellow en Oxford, en el Reino Unido. Además, hay que decir que el profesor Acharya fue uno de los primeros académicos del área de los estudios internacionales en proponer la tendencia sobre la inclusión de diferentes perspectivas en el análisis de las relaciones internacionales, y que lo denominó las relaciones internacionales globales, el así llamado Global allá, del que van ustedes a escuchar hoy de sus propias reflexiones. Por lo tanto, varias de sus investigaciones y publicaciones se enmarcan en esa propuesta, pero también y sobre todo en los estudios internacionales del sudeste asiático. Entre los libros, la mayoría de los libros más importantes que ha publicado se encuentran el Reimagining International Relations, World Orders in the Thought and Practice of Indian, Chinese and Islamic Civilizations, con Barry Busan, otro de los promotores también de esta idea del global allá. Otra de las obras muy importantes que deberían revisar es The Constructing Global Order, The End of American World Order, Why Govern, Rethinking Demand and Progress in Global Governance, edited también por Cambridge, The Making of Southeast Asia, and Constructing a Security Community in Southeast Asia. Una variedad de ensayos que ha publicado a lo largo de su carrera en el International Security and World Politics, International Studies Quarterly, en Pacific Affairs, Journal of Peace Research, Global Governance, Financial Times, Foreign Affairs Today y muchas otras más. En realidad tenemos el privilegio de tener aquí al pensador de esta idea de inclusión para entender y explicar mejor las relaciones internacionales de la actualidad y del pasado, por supuesto. Así es que, welcome to Ecuador, welcome to CIPRI, and welcome to this event.
Thank you. I'm going to stand, if you don't mind. I think keynote speakers should always stand. Thank you. I should say Raul because he's my friend, and Diego, my friend, and my new friend, Michelle. So I'm among friends. It's very nice and comfortable. I should tell you a secret about me being here. Nobody invited me. I invited myself. When I met, I think it was Diego, I met you some.
No,
yeah.
you met Raul.
Yeah, or Raul. I said, could you invite me to Quito? Because I really want to visit the place. And if you have an opportunity, I would love to come. So when the opportunity came, so he not only invited me, but became my principal host here. And this is my first visit to Ecuador. And of course, I'm the last few days, if any of you follow Twitter, I have a Twitter handle. You'll see me tweeting about all the places I've been walking and eating around town for the last 2 days. So thank you very much for your wonderful invitation and your hospitality. Now, since time is running out, I know we have an hour, I would like to go straight into the topic, and maybe we could have the first slide or PowerPoint. I have a PowerPoint. Is that going to be on today? Okay. If not, that's all right.
No, it's ready. But,
Okay. I guess some of the graphics and points will be helpful, since I'm going to speak in English and
ready.
okay. So, all right, thank you, that's great. So I'm going to talk about global international relations, so global IR, meanings, purposes, and limits. So before I go into the substance, I'd like to give you a sense of how this concept of global IR is rapidly expanding around the world. So these are some of the books that have come out recently. So you have a book on Africa in global international relations. The first, the one in the middle, the red book, is where I got it started in 2010. It was called Non-Western IR Theory, not global IR, but it's covering mostly Asia and Islam. Then the book on Africa in global international relations. Then most recently, Latin America in global international relations, and also the special issue of the journal, Southeast Asia in global international relations. And in between, we have books that are not edited, but co-authored by myself and my longtime collaborator, Professor Barry Buzan of the London School of Economics. So this is a growing phenomenon around the world. It's in Latin America, it's in Asia, it's in Africa, it's actually in Southeast Asia, and as well as the Middle East as well. So why? Okay. Well, this idea of global IR first started in 2014 when I was the president of the International Studies Association. Those of you who might know this, ISA is the largest association, professional association for international relations scholars. There are also practitioners, but mostly scholars, including students and professors in the world. And it's been there for over 60 years now. And I was elected as the 54th president, actually there are on the 55th convention, but the 54th president. And in a sense, kind of a turning point, because I was the first non-white, non-Western president of this association. And since then, they have had another one, but it has been a very Western-centric, Americano-centric organization, very influential. But it took them 54 years to elect their first non-Western, non-white president. And taking that advantage of that opportunity, I decided to pitch for a theme that has been already very close to my heart, which is how to make international relations a truly global discipline. Now, the term international in international relations is misleading. It is not an international discipline in terms of its theories, its ideas, and also the major centers of learning and training. And I understand there are some of you who are doing political science here. This is a convention about political science and international relations. I was actually trained as a political scientist before I did international relations. Both these fields are very Western-centric, meaning they're the key thinkers are from the West. The key ideas and writers are from the West. There is very little space for non-Western thinkers or ideas. And I include in non-Western Latin America and the Caribbean, although I do know that there is a much more mixed legacy here, but it's basically an American social science. It was invented in Britain in 1919. The first chair of international relations was created or established. It was called international politics. It was established in the University of Wales in 1919. And after a decade or so, the field moved to the United States. The gravitas of the field moved to the United States. And since then, it has been really dominated by American scholars, American universities, and publications and the like. Europe and Britain did have some role, but the rest of the world was pretty much marginalized. There's very little in the traditional literature for the first 40, 50 years of its existence that you could identify as non-Western. So international relations, despite its name, was not international. It was certainly not global. And that really was its major limitation. So my instinct and opportunity, it's more like an opportunity, is to actually use the pulpit of my presidency to bring this idea, push for this idea of globalizing international relations. And that happened in the convention in Toronto in 2014. And things have really moved on very rapidly. This idea had really caught on around the world, got traction around the world. So much so that I don't know whether you can see this little chart here from Google Ngram. Since this is Google Ngram, the number of books that have global IR as a subject. And you can see that since 2014, it has shot up quite dramatically. And I don't know whether I can point out there, but anyway, you can see the graph. If you can look at the graph, you will see right there. And it's still growing in terms of books, journal articles, conferences. There have been 3 International Studies Association ISA conventions since the one I organized in 2015, which have global IR in the theme. So this is certainly a very dynamic and growing idea. But what is this idea? And what are its potentials and limitations? And that's what we're going to talk about today. So what is global IR? First of all, it is challenging. Challenging means that it seeks to put non-Western societies, broadly defined. And non-Western, by the way, does mean not just the global South, what we call global South, including Latin America, Caribbean, Asia, Africa, and the Middle East, but also people, the indigenous people who live in Western countries, like the Native American Indians or the indigenous people of this country, or of the Americas, because I don't consider them as Western. So they are part of this deal too. They're also marginalized. So the idea is to bring them to center stage of the study of international relations. And then at the same time, challenge the discipline to make it more inclusive. Inclusive here means that instead of, it's not rejecting the theories we have already there. Like, those of you who have done IR theory would know what is realism, what is liberalism, and the constructivism. So not completely rejecting them, but challenging them to pay attention to the voices, the histories, the contributions of these non-Western societies. So it kind of tries to turn the traditional IR over on its head. Traditional IR basically gives the Western countries and their culture, their civilization, their ideas on the top, and the non-Western ideas and civilizations on the bottom. This one actually puts the non-Western ideas on the top without necessarily rejecting the values and contributions and ideas of Western societies. Now, this is therefore much more inclusive. There are theories of international relations like post-colonialism and among others, are critical theories that completely reject, totally reject the existing theories of realism, liberalism, and constructivism. Global IR doesn't do that. And that's a big difference between global IR and critical IR theories, including post-colonial theories, including some of the theories that came out of the Latin American region. So it's radical, it's challenging, but it's inclusive, and it includes both the mainstream and the challengers. But it does give certain privileging, certain privileging of the challengers. So that's basically what global IR is. It redefines and broadens the discipline of IR by recognizing the histories, ideas, practices, and contributions of societies and actors that have been neglected or marginalized in the discipline until now. So, and this is one of the key things I'm going to talk about today. It's a little a small font, so you may not be able to read it very well. In fact, I'm having difficulty reading it myself. So I'll be looking at this screen because I'm not looking. I have a text in my smartphone, but I don't want to consult it. I'll look on the screen. The first element is what I call pluralistic universalism. Global is not universal. Universal is not global. The term universal is very romantic, very appealing. That means, including all. But if you look at the history of this concept in Western political theory, the political theory of enlightenment, for example, it's pretty much a way of imposing Western values on the rest. So there's one way to rationality. That's the Western European rationality. There are one set of ideas that are better, superior to others, and everybody must follow that, or else. And that's what Enlightenment thinkers like Immanuel Kant talked about, that if, colonialism is bad, but if the non-Western societies cannot live up to the ideals of the West, the political ideas, the rationalist, the mindset, the rationalist mindset of the West, then so too bad. They should remain colonized until they come up to the Western standard intellectually. Now, that means there is only one set of standard, intellectual standard, that applies to all, one size that fits all. Now, that is really how universalism has been promoted by Western thinkers. So my idea of universalism is pluralistic. Pluralistic means, first of all, you accept diversity. Not everybody is going to be alike. Not everybody is going to think alike. There's always going to be differences among us. But you can find common ground through dialogue, through interaction in meetings like this. So it's the common ground that you build through socialization. That is universal. What is not universal is that one society, one civilization comes up with a set of ideas and think everybody, including much older civilizations of China or India, should follow it. So international relations has always been based on what is called the monistic, the Enlightenment universalism. Global IR talks about pluralistic universalism, that you accept diversity, but try to find common ground. You may not have a complete agreement. There will be differences, but that's life. The differences are not going, but you still have the scope for finding enough common ground that you can actually do great things with it. That is one of the key elements of pluralistic universalism, which accepts diversity, but builds common ground. Then deploying world history, or some people call it global history, but I call it world history, rather than just European or Greco-Roman history, which is seen as a precursor to European civilization. So a lot of IR theory comes from European history, especially Europe after the Peace of Westphalia, Europe after the 17th century. But sometimes they go back and bring back Greece and Rome and their ideas and as if they were ancestors of Europe. Actually, they were not. Greece was not a European civilization. It was a distinct civilization on its own, Mediterranean, similarly Roman Empire, but modern Europeans have appropriated Greece and Rome and then linked it up with their, post-Enlightenment or post-Renaissance intellectual development and created this idea of the West which is very superficial, very artificial. But anyway, the argument here is that history is very important to study international relations, but that should not be just European history or Greco-Roman history. It should be the history of the entire world, of the Africans, of the pre-Columbian civilizations of the Americas, of the Indians, of the Chinese, and the Muslims, and the like. And they have contributions to make, as if they were not, they had no political views or international relations. You can actually find many examples of very sophisticated ideas, norms, institutions, and practices all over the world, right in this region, in the Andean region of the Inca civilization. How did they actually build legitimacy? How did they build what was at one point the largest empire in the world? It's not easy to achieve that. They didn't last very long, but still they managed an empire and managed it in a very sophisticated way. And that doesn't get into the IR textbooks. And you can talk about the Mayas, but you can talk about also the Chinese, the Indians, and the Islamic civilization. So world history would give us insights into those kind of attempts that are very successful, by the way, in building international relations and world order, going back to 5,000 years rather than 400 years of Westphalia. And then in that sense, moving on, other regions and civilizations contributed. That's what I was trying to say. There are plenty of evidence, plenty of literature that while the field of international relations, what we call IR, may have been created in Britain in 1919, but the substance of international relations, like diplomacy, free trade, human rights, humanitarian warfare, cooperation, great power cooperation, all these things have a prior history, well before the rise of the West, well before the Columbian voyages, well before the discovery of the Americas or by Columbus, or the discovery of the sea route to India by Vasco da Gama. So we should make it front and center. I'm not going to dismiss everything that has happened since Westphalia, but we should also trace the origins of the key concepts of IR well back to 5,000 years. And you'll find that there is surprising degree of not if continuity per se, but many of the ideas we take for granted as European in origin actually have origins in other places. And they may be parallel origins, independently created, or they may be through diffusion. For example, the Mayas in Mexico and Central America, they developed a very sophisticated city-state system, not an empire, but a city-state system, very similar to the Greek city-state system. But there was no connection between the Greeks and the Mayas. So you can find that sometimes civilizations, because we are all human, we tend to find similar problems, similar challenges. So therefore, it is not surprising that different parts of the world develop different ideas of hierarchy, empire. Empire is, by the way, divine kingship, very, very long-term successful institutions. Democracy is actually a blip in the history of ideas. Divine monarchy is the most long-lasting institution, political institution in the history of the world. Now that had origins in multiple locations, sometimes through diffusion, sometimes independently. So the global IR tries to find that, and you'll be surprised at how many of these concepts are independently developed in different parts of the world. And they should be brought in. Sometimes they came to diffusion. You can say nationalism. Maybe it came out of Europe and then moved around the world and got the colonial societies independent. Maybe that's a European invention concept that had diffusion. But there are many other concepts that had nothing to do with the European. They pre-existed Europeans, and they said, one example would be divine monarchy. Diplomacy was invented in 15th century BC in Middle East, the idea of Amarna diplomacy. The first treaty was actually between Egyptians and Hittites, and we have still exact language of those treaties available, very similar to many of the modern treaties in the world. Anyway, just to give you some example, that's how global IR tries to look at history and find where are these ideas coming from. like a detective, idea detective, like an archaeologist, but in a kind of political science and international relations way, and try to find similarities, differences. Not everything going to be similar, but there'll be similarities, differences, parallels, approximations, and then build together a more holistic picture of what international relations and political science is. So then the other thing is, based on that, very important to study regions, regionalism, and regional orders. So global IA doesn't mean everything must be global. Regions are actually a building block of global. So you cannot have global without local. And I don't have to tell you, in this region, regionalism is very, very critical. Many political scientists and international relations scholars from Latin America and the Caribbean start their career by studying regionalism, as they do, by the way, in Southeast Asia, as they do in Africa. So in some ways, what we call international relations today is actually the study of Europe as a region, study of United States as a nation. So international relations masquerades, or European regional IR masquerades as the study of international relations. Why not we bring in other regions which have also their own dynamics, both in the past and today? For example, regionalism as a modern concept was invented not in Europe, not in the concept of Europe, but decades before that in this region, in Pan-American ideal. And I have written a lot about it. So why don't we give more credit to this region rather than to the European Union? Okay, so then multiple forms of agency. Agency means the ability to get things done, contribute to, say, international relations, diplomacy, world order. And but agency is not just material. Like you know, I see a lot of uniformed people here. It's not just about military power or economic power. It's also about ideas. It's also about socialization. So a lot of change happens in the world through ideas. And when a country is weak, like for example, some of the countries in the region, maybe weak materially, not much military power, not much economic power, but can still contribute in ideas. And that is why the global South countries, the third world countries, contributed to non-alignment, because they're materially very weak. In 1950s, China, India, Egypt, and the former Yugoslavia, which is part of the movement, they were weak economically and militarily. They had just come out of colonial rule. But how did they got their voice to be heard in international relations? By creating ideas like non-alignment, which caught on. And you can say Latin America will be another example where you have dependency, the idea of dependency, an idea that actually got into IR theory in a way that very few other regions have been able to do that at that time. So ideas do matter. Resistance matter. Challenging something, rejecting something is a form of agency. Rejecting dominance, rejecting imperialism, rejecting colonialism, meaning also you're contributing, paving the way for a more positive contribution. So agency can be also global, can be regional, can be local, and it can be from Western actors, but can be from non-Western actors. In fact, the weaker, materially weaker actors, like states and societies, have a better opportunity to contribute through ideas and social movements from the global South. And that's what global IR studies quite deeply and with a lot of interest. And finally, just as I said, global IR doesn't reject realism, liberalism, constructivism, the traditional theories, unlike some critical theories. It actually challenges them to broaden their mind and accept. You can be a realist and still study Mexico or Ecuador or India. In fact, the vast majority of IR scholars in India tend to be either post-colonialists or realists. So you cannot say that you are from the global South, you can't study realism, because realism is Western. No, there are many contributions for realism, like Kautilya of India, Sun Tzu of China. They're contributors to realism. So unlike therefore some of my critical colleagues, I do not reject realism, liberalism, constructivism. In fact, I've done a lot of work myself on constructivism and norms. Okay, so moving on then to go to the, now this is coming straight to Latin America now, since this meeting is being held here in this region and I'm here, I thought I will make a few comments about this. Now, I'm not an expert in Latin America, but I have socialized with people like Professor Raul. But this book came out at a conference, out of a conference that I co-organized in Argentina, the Fluxo of Argentina, with help from the Inter-American Development Bank. And we brought together a bunch of colleagues from the region, from outside, to see what is the contribution of Latin America, and the Caribbean is there too. Unfortunately, it was a simple error that got Caribbean out of the main title, but the introduction talks about Latin American Caribbean in global IR. Now, to cut a long story short, by the way, this book has been extremely popular. As an edited book, it was the top 10 book of 2021 in International Affairs, the leading journal of IR today, published by Chatham House in UK. This was one of the top 10 books, and very positively reviewed around the world. Magnificent contributions by authors. Now, the key point is that Latin America has made, Latin American thinkers, Caribbean thinkers have made a lot of contribution to international relations, but it's not recognized. Some of them that have been recognized will be dependency theory. Everybody knows about dependency, but then later on it moved to more a sort of positive construction of autonomy, and then peripheral realism that you probably know more about this than I do. Our friend Alden Tickner from Colombia has done really pioneering work on all this. But what I felt, and this is slightly controversial, but I've been kind of telling my colleagues and friends in the region that what is missing from their contribution is any sense of indigenous history and agency. And this is where this region lags behind Asia and Middle East. In Asia, in China, for example, there is a big movement, intellectual movement, to bring Chinese culture and civilization back into the mainstream of IR. The Chinese scholars have been writing about their history, like All Under Heaven, the Tianxia concept, and their way of maintaining empire, developing theories, their way of relationalism as opposed to rationalism, their way of mode of thinking about the world, which is relational rather than self-centered, individualistic. Now, they're talking about that, publishing books. In India also, bringing back ideas like Indian, the classical thinkers or rulers like Ashoka, the moral element of international relations. One of the biggest moral thinkers and rulers, more like a ruler than thinker of ancient world, was the 3rd century BC emperor of India, Ashoka Maurya, or Kautilya, Arthashastra. Total realist, as realist as it gets, 1,500 years before Machiavelli came about. Now they are doing that kind of work. In Islam, the growing movement to bring back Islam, bring in Islamic concepts of going back to the founding of Islam in the 7th century. And you can find Africans are doing work about African culture, civilization, African agency. Now, I don't see that in being done in this region. But I may be wrong, because a lot of the work that is done here is in Spanish, or in Brazil, of course, Portuguese. It doesn't get to be known outside. And there may be a lot of work out there that we don't know about. But generally, it hasn't made that kind of impression. And that is a challenge, because you do have those of us, and I have done a bit of a study of the three major empires, three of the major empires, the Incas, the Aztecs, and the Mayans were not an empire, but a state system. And I was astounded at how many interesting concepts and ideas come from these civilizations. And they are not really that old. I mean, we go back to Greece and Rome, 2,000 years to get their ideas. These civilizations were just there 700 years ago. So there's a lot of opportunity to do that kind of work. But what's the problem in doing that work? And I'll conclude there. I will warn you about the obstacles and limitations. Now, one is, of course, lack of resources, research funding, even internet access in some places. This is particularly true of places like India, for example, and good libraries. Language barrier, I mentioned that you may have a lot of great work done in Spanish or Portuguese, but if it doesn't get into the English language, which unfortunately is the lingua franca of international relations, then they cannot have a two-way communication between scholars cannot be part of the intellectual community, global intellectual community. And global IR requires a global intellectual community. Western hegemony and racism in training, hiring professors, publishing very much exists, and it is coming more and more to the open these days. There is a fear that if you do this global IR, studying non-Western civilizations, you may not get a job. Now that is a genuine fear. I have to deal with this all the time when I give talks like this, but it is a fear that is somewhat unfounded. I can assure you that you will get a job if you do it in a way, again, I don't say do it right, but do it in a serious way, in a passionate way. There will be no problems in getting a job. And there is also this being criticized. It's particularly true of these days in Asia, that anybody who talks about Asian civilization, Asian culture, Asian history, whether in China or Islam or in India, gets branded as a government apologist. Because the governments of China under Xi Jinping, government of India under Modi, government of Turkey under Erdogan, they are actually pushing for the civilizational revival. And the academics who are not really interested in that policy discourse getting caught up in this. So as if everybody who's studying the Chinese history or Indian history or Islamic history is actually supporting the government. That's not true. Many of them use history. It's their sort of vantage point. They use it to have a conversation, because the Western academics have been doing that for centuries, or at least for a century, using Western history to create a discipline. So scholars from India, China, and Islam are using their history to have an argument, to have a conversation, and they are not necessarily supporting the government. In fact, a lot of Indian scholars who draw on Indian history are anti-government. They don't particularly care about the Modi government, and you can find similar stuff, but not so overtly in East Asia. So, but there is this fear that we branded as an apologist for the government or a cultural exceptionalist, that you're a culturalist, or a civilizationalist. But then again, my answer to that is that the Western scholars did that for decades and decades. Nobody called them civilizationalists. Western IR is actually, in many ways, a just legitimation of Western civilization, and nobody accused these people of civilizationalism. So why you do that for Chinese and Indians and Muslims? So if you look at this, there is a bit of a challenge to globalizing IR. And it is going to be an evolutionary, slow-moving process, but it is making progress because of the graphs and charts I show you. So let me just conclude here and take some of your questions. But I do think that the message I'm trying to give you is that this is not the time to go back to the past and look at traditional international relations as a permanent thing. World order is changing. Non-Western powers are rising, relatively speaking. So when international relations was created as a field, that was when West was at its peak in the early 20th century. Now today, it's a very different world. There's a global power shift. So we cannot continue to have the same international relations that we had 100 years ago. And that's why global IR provides an inclusive pathway to move the field forward. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias a todos. Ahora tenemos un tiempo para las preguntas. Como el profesor ya mencionó, está dispuesto a tomar preguntas que pueden hacer en español o en inglés. Comenzamos con unas dos preguntas. We start with two questions and then take two questions again. Dos preguntas. Comenzamos por aquí. No sé si había por ahí un micrófono que estaba a disposición, creo, por ahí para que se pueda escuchar y también para que puedan escuchar los colegas que están conectados allá. No sé si también nos pueden, no sé si es posible también tener las preguntas de de los colegas que están conectados, si tal vez nos pueden hacer llegar, sería excelente. Ok, comenzamos entonces por aquí con la pregunta, por favor.
Professor Acharya, welcome to Ecuador. Thank you very much for your very interesting talk today. I teach international relations at the undergraduate level. Actually, most of your audience right now are students of international relations here at Universidad Internacional del Ecuador. My question is, how would you introduce the idea of global IR at an undergraduate level? The thing is that, of course, as teachers of international relations, we more or less teach the basic Western canon, you know, like the theories and the methods are the ones that you would study anywhere else in the world. And that is basically the Western canon. Again, how would you introduce the teaching of global international relations at an undergraduate level? Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for the question. We can have another, we can get another one so that we get them together. There was somebody else over there. I think I saw the hand. Well, until somebody else decides to continue, maybe we can reply to the question until the public get a bit like.
Okay. First of all, that's a great question, and I often get that from professors like yourself who are teaching undergraduate, and I actually teach undergraduate. I teach a first-year seminar on global IR. So my answer would be, we don't have a really good textbook that introduces global IR, but they are in the making, but not there yet. So the first thing would be to start with history. And as I said, the global history, world history. So a lot of the textbooks, when I studied international relations, I didn't even start from 1648 Westphalia. I started from First World War and Second World War, so from the 20th century, as if the history of international relations goes back to only 20th century. Now people start with the European history. So I'm just, what I'm saying is that a good way to teach students global IR is to start with history of the world, not history of Europe. And sure, you can teach them the Greek city-states, the Roman Republic, the Roman Empire, which are pretty important. But you can also, who invented the first city-state system? Sumerians, very, very distinct. And there is a lot of writing on this. It's no longer like you have to, operate in a vacuum. The Sumerians invented the first city-state system, what we call anarchy today. Anarchy doesn't mean disorder, but having no higher authority above the state. I did mention that a divine monarchy is the most successful political institution in the history of the world. So it was there in 3000 BC. Both Egyptians and Sumerians invented it, and it's still there today, either directly or indirectly. And then we can talk about where empire came from. Empire is hierarchical systems that are far more common in the history of the world than anarchical systems. We know that. There have been many more empires. Empires have taken up much more space in the history of the world than, say, Westphalian systems. And Westphalia was kind of a misnomer anyway, because even after Westphalia, the Europeans maintained big empires all over the world. So you can talk about law of the sea or freedom of the seas, humanitarian warfare. All these concepts come from different parts of the history. And again, we don't have a great textbook, but they are coming. And I will urge you to take a look at the book that Professor Bujan and I did, that Reimagining International Relations. It looks at Islam, China, and India, and see how we can develop or derive core concepts that we use today in international relations, like balance of power, like hierarchy, like norms from those civilizations, going back to the pre-modern period. So that'll be a good textbook, even though I am a co-author of that, but there will be more such books coming and writing. But you can actually bring in history as much as possible to lay the foundation of IR thinking, and then you go to Europe. Europe did not create international relations. Europe, I remember this book by Henry Kissinger called World Order. It's a really remarkably, I don't know what to say. It's a strange book because it talks about world orders. The first 2 chapters are on Europe. So Europe, Westphalia, concept of Europe. Then it goes backwards to bring in China, India, Islam. Islam is a world of disorder, and then comes back to the US in the end, savior of the world. Now that's the best-selling book on world order. And that sort of tells you that as if Europe started everything, and civilization, it's like, civilizations, it goes backwards. Civilizations that are predating Europe comes later, after the European foundation has been explained. I actually use that as a textbook to tell my students how ethnocentric and Eurocentric the discipline is, if you look at the chapter. But you have to create your own text. You have to create your own set of readings for the time being. But more and more publishers are becoming aware of this gap that you mentioned. What do you do, undergraduate? By the way, if you are interested at all, there is a paper which is in SSRN in Zurich, open access. So its title is very similar to what you say, what the introductory course to international relations misses out. So it's basically what we don't get to teach to our first-year students and undergraduate students. And this is basically the same argument I'm making now.
Muchísimas gracias. Thank you very much for the answers and explanations. We have another one here. Please go ahead. No.
Okay. Good afternoon, Professor Acharya. It is a big honor to be here listening to you in person. Taking into consideration this recommendation of writing our own texts, I would like to know your recommendation on this overcoming of language barriers, because when we write these textbooks on topics of IR, Latin American foreign affairs, for example, we have this dilemma of if we will write it in Spanish for our audience and for having a local debate, but on the other hand, we should maybe write it in English to be on the global debate. So this is always a dilemma, because I think that we need to overcome this Eurocentric view and all this Eurocentric concentration, or this English concentration of IR textbooks. Yeah. But at the same time, we want to have our own textbooks, but how to be on the global debate at the same time. So this is a big dilemma, and I would like to know your recommendations on this.
Okay, any more questions, or let's answer this first?
I do have a question as well, which I've been all the time thinking about in the context of a paper in which also you wrote actually the introduction regarding the introduction courses to first degree students on introduction to international relations. And of course, we also think about how to create knowledge. How to create knowledge is being taught. It is 2 ways now. These are ways of explaining and understanding. Yeah. But this explaining and understanding also is a westernized way of understanding reality or explaining reality. Ontologically, going back to this Western way of thinking reality. But there are other ways of thinking the reality, other ways of conceptualizing ontology. So how do we go along, how do we approach global IR in the sense that the production of knowledge so that we can contribute to the discipline?
Right. So these are basically what I call institutional barriers, language barriers that are really, really difficult to overcome. By the way, if there is any consolation, The French have the same problem because most of the writings they have on international relations are in French, and they're always frustrated because nobody else pays attention to all the great things they're writing. Once in a while, you get translations. The Germans also, although Germans are better in more proficient in English, and more German scholars write in English than French, but they also have a vast body of literature that is in German that doesn't see the light of the day. China, by the way, where IR is growing, the fastest growth of international relations is in China. The vast majority of Chinese scholars publish in Chinese. And I spent a lot of time in China working, teaching there. And many of my books are translated into Chinese. And I always get an invitation, can you write a preface for my book? But it's in Chinese. So I will give you the first chapter translated into English. So there I go. I write based on that. So you are not alone, okay? This is the tyranny of the language, English language. On the other hand, English language does provide an opportunity for more communication. And so the way to do this would be basically through networking. Networking is critical. So every time you have a conference like this, not only a national conference, but a regional conference, you always invite people like me, okay? So, put me up in while I'm staying with Raul. So, I can say that people love to come and engage with you, and you don't have to really pay them anything. And and make sure that I gave this suggestion to the Mexican International Studies Association, where I gave few times keynote speeches. I said, you should not only have panels in English, in Spanish, you should have some panels in English. So now the AMIEI, they every year when they have their annual convention, they have once in 2 years convention, they have certain number of panels in English. And that does attract a lot of professors from outside. And once you're there, everybody can speak a bit of English. So socialization happens. Another thing is to get publications. So you don't have to publish a lot to get noticed. Okay, you have to publish only a few. So if there are 5 major books, like Latin America in Global IR comes out every year and gets recognized by the biggest journals in the world, that will be good. It took us 4 years to do this book. It's an intense effort to do this, but my colleagues, especially in Argentinian Flaxo, but also the contributors, we all got together and we got this done, and now it's a widely used textbook. So you should be writing something like this, a text, let it take 3 years, 4 years, 5 years, let it be intense, bring in some people from all over the region, the Latin America, Caribbean, but also from North America and Europe and elsewhere, and create that network. And then you can also do that in International Studies Association. There is a global IR section now, which is established this year. And the global IR section does exactly, it promotes this kind of dialogue. So if you want to have a conference online, ISA will sponsor it online. But if you want to actually go there, you can go to the convention, and many scholars from Latin America do go there, but not as much. But once you are there, you socialize. So even the traditional IR was founded on socialization. It's a bunch of colleagues that founded the International Studies Association. They knew each other personally, and started in Britain also, a small group of people started it, but through networking. So there is no substitute for networking at conferences here in the region with outsiders being here, or in the International Studies Association, which is really the truly global association. You were participating and doing a few key targeted textbooks that may take 3 to 5 years, but you could get them published in English or get them translated into English. There is a great Chinese book, by the way, by a Chinese scholar called Qinya Qin. He's the founder of the Chinese School of IR, who brought in Chinese relational theory and turned it into a book on epistemology. The original book was written in Chinese and got translated by Cambridge University Press to English. So that is another way. On the question of different types of ontology, different ways of thinking, different modes of thinking, and understanding the world or knowing the world. I think there is a lot less scope for plurality now, because this is where graduate training becomes decisive. Because to earn a PhD in North America in particularly United States, you have to go through this comps system, and a key part of that is methodology, and that's where they really do gatekeeping. And there's not the same like a King, Cohen, and Verba textbook on the methodology. There are very few choices out there to open up the thinking space when it comes to ontology or epistemology. But this relational theory I'm talking about, it is actually doing magic now. People are doing more and more writing, moving away from positivism, moving away from rationalism, and you have to struggle. The scope is a bit narrow. The door is a bit narrow. But you can struggle and get in there or start this movement here. Again, understanding the language barrier is not going to be easy to overcome. There's some questions there.
We have some questions over there.
Questions.
Thank you so much for being here. I'm a student of the last semesters of international relations, and I find very interesting that maybe we as students can be aware that international relations can be studied from a non-Western perspective. But how to make this understood in a society that does not understand international relations in general, to find places where to apply what we have learned or that can be interested in investing in research projects to just give a change to the understanding of the discipline?
Can you explain that to me? I didn't quite
Maybe I
get it.
have to repeat it.
The question is that how can we explain, or how can we do international relations as a research when there is no investment for this kind of research, because they learn the Western kind of
Okay, I got it.
research.
Thank you. I got that, but I just want to be sure I got the question right. because of
Should we
the-
take the second one so we have two questions at the same time?
Well, thank you for your lecture. I'm also an international relations student, and I do think these kind of spaces are very important for us to understand the field we're getting into. My question is about women. I know we don't have many women inside like the big spaces of international relations. And my question is, do you think women can develop a different approach of global international relations? Do you think that's kind of an obstacle for this situation? And is some work being done around this kind of problem that I do think is a problem? Thank you for your answer.
Okay. Any more questions?
Maybe we should take another one,
Yeah.
last one over there. Just at the back, with the stripy, no, atrás,
There's two there.
atrás, yeah.
You have to tell me the second question again, because I missed part of it.
Okay, thank you, Professor Echaria. So how do you think that rethinking international relations and reality from a global perspective can really guide the foreign policies of countries, for example, as you mentioned, Latin American countries, when they are still mostly subject to Western hegemonies like the United States and Eastern ones like China? Thank you.
Okay, I got that one.
Yeah. And the second one is, what do you think about
India school.
uh,
Oh, yeah, I got that, yeah. Yeah. Okay, so to answer these questions, first of all, how do you do this global IR when there is no investment in promoting that kind of an approach or perspective? So I would say that it is a problem, but it's not insurmountable, because ultimately your study, your intellectual achievement is yours. It's based on your own effort. I can give you many examples of scholars who have come from very poor backgrounds without any resources, who have, through determination, managed to make an impact in the field of international relations just by being interested. So it's the passion that really matters. The universities don't look at political science as a productive field of investment. So there is so much emphasis these days on so the STEM fields, science and technology, and political science and international relations doesn't get that much attention from governments or from even within universities. Although it is a growing field, international relations is growing around the world, but doesn't get any of the investment that the science and technology fields do. So you have to have a passion for it. And the one good thing about your generation that people of my generation didn't have is the internet. So you can pretty much get everything from the internet for free if you know where to look for it, or at least most of it. So the real importance here is your faculty, how your faculty guide it, what kind of syllabus you are given. Like the question about how do you teach undergraduate international relations from a global perspective? Well, the primary responsibility is the faculty members. They have to create. That's why I teach a course, undergraduate first year class on international relations, global IR, even though I'm kind of a more senior professor, university professor. I don't have to teach undergraduate if I don't want to, but every year I teach that, because that's my contribution. Create a syllabus, and the syllabus is available if anybody wants it, and that's the way. So don't always depend on investment by the government or the university, although that does matter. But if you are really interested in this, and when you go to do your, say you want to be an academic, you want to do a doctoral degree, you can choose the universities. Don't go to universities which are very traditional, and go to universities where you have this broader global perspective, and you can actually do a bit of research to find out which universities actually provide that kind of study within countries and also across the world. It's not the best solution. We still need, investment. You need support from the government, from the universities. But I think there is still enough scope for you to do to study the way you want to study international relations. On the integration of women, this is a bit of a contradiction now. I just read a piece of statistics that women now make the majority of students in international relations, majority. And the faculty gap also narrowing. There are almost as many women professors in international relations than men, as men in Western countries, not in the global South. So yet the field is still very masculine, very much kind of biased against the voice of the women. And feminism is there, but it's not considered. It's considered like a separate field. So you do feminism, it's not mainstreamed. But I am hoping that that will change, given the fact that so many of the audience, the consumers, are actually women, and so many of the professors are also women increasingly. So this is the balance between gender balance is much more favorable to women in international relations than in science and technology. So let's hope that this will have an impact in the longer term. In terms of how foreign policy, global IR might impact on foreign policy, talking about Western hegemony moving away from the West to, say, the East, for example, that's a very important question. And that's one reason why you should do global IR. Because, when international relations was invented, as I said, the West was dominant. Britain was still the leading power in the world. And the United States took over soon after World War II. So the West was basically economically and militarily dominant. So if you are a student of international relations today and look at the future, you would have to think about who is going to be the most consequential countries in the world. And that's not going to be France or Germany or United States will always be important, but it's not going to be the same superpower as it was once, despite all the rhetoric, think about bringing back the American world order. So there will be China, there will be India, there will be, if Brazil gets its act together, and also global South in general. And this is not surprising because China and India used to be the two leading largest economies in the world until the 18th century, for producing something like 40% of the world's GDP. So there's nothing new about these countries coming because of population, because of early industrialization or manufacturing, if not industrial manufacturing, and they are coming back. And also the global South was down and out for 200, 300, 400 years. After colonialism formally moves away, there is, even though a lot of countries are mismanaged, they still have an opportunity in many places to develop. So projections are that by 2060, the global South countries will produce 60% of the GDP. They used to do only 20% like 50 years ago. So 20% to 60%. Now they're about half. Global South now accounts for half of the world's GDP. Substantial shift from 20, 30 years ago. A lot of world trade is between South and South, not North and South, not between the Western countries and South and global South countries, but among Southern countries. China has played a very important role in this, and this trend is not going to disappear. So I would think this is a good time to go east and look east and find out what the civilizations are capable of, what has been their contribution in the past, and history is not going to repeat itself. But it is quite possible. In some ways it is. China is now almost the leading economy in the world, and it was before 18th century. India just overtook Britain, its former colonial master, as the 5th largest economy in the world. And now, of course, an Indian has been elected as British Prime Minister. So it would have been unthinkable. I mean, he's British, he's not Indian, but he is of Indian ethnic origin. You couldn't imagine that even 20 years ago. So the world is changing. Non-Western, I hate to use the term race, but non-Western people and societies are rising, relatively speaking. The West is, I don't believe that West is going to disappear, but West will not be a singular category. It will be weaker, relatively speaking, than it has been. The world will be much more pluralistic. And that's why you need to have a pluralistic view of international relations, which is what Global IR tries to sort of basically advocate.
Thank you very much. Para culminar, close to the end, I think we will take 2 more questions if you are still por aquí. Tenía una pregunta acá, y también, y el mayor ahí. Sí. Bueno, 3 más, ¿no? 3 more.
Yeah, 3 more is fine. And
okay.
At the very end, if I may request those who are handling the PowerPoint to show the very last slide I missed. I kept it to the end, but after the 3rd question, okay? There is something there I would like to conclude this session with. Okay. The very last slide of my PowerPoints, but let's take the 3 questions.
Good evening, Professor. Good evening, everyone. My question is related with the last one. On these days, we have known that Xi Jinping has been reelected for his 3rd presidential period. My question is how this punctual event, this re-election of Xi Jinping, will influence the international relations around the world.
Okay,
thank
very
you.
Good question. Okay. Okay, next question.
La otra,
Professor Amitav, thank you very much for your lecture. I'm going to stand up as well. Can we locate global IR as a critical theory? Does it relate to the colonial thought? I want to know your thoughts about that. Thank you.
That's a very good and tricky question too. It's a trick question to put me on the spot, but thank you for asking.
Professor Amitabh, thanks for your talk. My question is a bit personal. What challenges or obstacles you had being the first non-Western president of the International Students Association?
Thank you. All right, these are great questions. And first with China, Xi Jinping. You know, nobody has a crystal ball, so nobody knows how China will pan out. And first of all, also for me, I don't make I make a distinction between a country and its leader. So you know, if I am in total disagreement with the leader, doesn't mean I don't like the country. So I am not a big fan of Xi Jinping personally, because when you compare countries, a lot of us compare countries. Okay, so that's how we do international relations. So how is China compared to US? How is US compared to Russia? But a better way to study international relations is to compare leaders, the successors. How is Xi Jinping compared to Hu Jintao? How is Xi Jinping compared to Deng Xiaoping? And I think he falls short. China had an absolutely fantastic system going, you know, 2 term limits, very good foreign policy, friends with everybody. I'm talking about 20 years ago, 2000s, and a very sophisticated diplomacy, winning soft power. Now look at China, widely mistrusted in its own region, and the domestic political space is very limited. China is a closed society, more closed than any time since the height of the Mao period. And also, and this is more important, China's economy has not really done very well under Xi Jinping. Now he inherited a very vibrant, buoyant economy, and had the, you know, and expanded his influence, Belt and Road Initiative. Initially looked very promising, but some of us had thought that this is not going to last. This is not going to work because it's too ambitious. And so right now, China's economy is also in trouble. It might revive. Maybe the reason is COVID-19, the zero COVID policy, as well as the trade war. But I think a lot of people who follow Chinese economy think Chinese economy is in trouble, cannot get back to, not only cannot get back to 10 years ago, but will actually have long-term decline. Maybe the Japan scenario, what happened to Japan in the 2000s and 1990s, but it still be a very important player. But having a third term, which was in some ways a way of tightening the grip of the party, but of the personality of the president on the polity, Chinese domestic polity, is, I believe, is going to backfire. So, but I may be wrong. I do follow China, but there are better. I follow China watches as well, and I think you could say. But the record is very simple. That compare China today, and you're talking about foreign relations. Compare China today and its foreign relations today with China's foreign relations 10 years ago. China's soft power has declined, despite investing a lot of money on vaccine diplomacy and mask diplomacy. It has actually suffered, and opinion polls bear it out. Opinion polls say China is not as trusted as it was 10, 15 years ago. So I don't see that changing very much, unless there is one possibility, and I hope that comes true, is that this guy gets a third term. So he has fulfilled his power ambition. Now he can relax and get back to what China was 10 years ago, which was really open. China was very open 10, 15 years ago under Hu Jintao. China was open to foreigners, for investments, and that was also open for its own people. Maybe he would think, okay, I've got my third term. I don't have to really try to stay in power and have this kind of a Vladimir Putin-like hold on my country. And let's hope for China's sake. Otherwise, the relationship will suffer even more. On the question of critical theory and global IR, all I can say is that I love critical theory, especially post-colonialism. Some of my best friends are post-colonialists, but I am not a post-colonialist. So the reason is, and critical theory has many different elements. So there is Marxism, there's postmodernism, feminism is critical theory, post-colonialism is critical theory. Global IR is closest to post-colonialism. So we come, I mean, from very beginning. And actually, it is true that some of my best friends are post-colonial scholars. But why I stay, and decolonialism too, why I stay away from that myself, for institutional reason and also my instinct. Institutionally, I want to have, I already told you, the vast majority, this has to be an inclusive theory. Not everybody in the world does or reject realism, liberalism, constructivism. Okay, so as I said, vast majority of Indian scholars in policy establishment are realists. In China, there are a lot of realists. Similarly, a lot of constructivists in other places. So we cannot say your theory is passé and we'll just bring in a total rejection, like rebooting the discipline with a sort of global IR. And the other difference between global IR and critical theory of post-colonialism is the question of agency. You may be familiar, and this is controversial, but I think people do accept it, that for a long time, post-colonialists and a lot of critical theories are about, it's all about resistance, how to challenge, how to dismantle the edifice of IR theory. Very little about what you can contribute. How do you rebuild IR? But if you look at the dynamic of the global South, and not just the scholars, but also the international relations and foreign policy of countries like India, for example, it's about agency. It's about creating an online movement. It's creating regional organizations like here. So it's not just resisting, it's also creating. And post-colonialism never captured that, never. So in my presidential speech, I had a statement that said that critical theory thrives, loves its marginalization, because it gives that kind of a vantage point. And again, I got criticized for that. But I said, now time to actually think, because my own work on agency, constructing global order, is all about agency. So I sympathize with post-colonialism, critical theory, draw inspiration for them, but I don't want to limit myself to just challenging, but also highlighting agency. And that is actually taken up. So there's a lot of literature on agency of Africa, agency of Latin America, Latin American agency, agency of the global South. So post-colonialism finally has come to take note of that. And I think that is the impact of the debate, global IR with post-colonialism. But at the same time, as you know, as a scholar, people want to maintain their turf. So feminists want to be feminists. They don't want to sign on to global IR. Post-colonialists want to have their own field. They want to have their own subsection. This is all institutional politics. So I have no illusion that everybody will fold their tent and join the camp. But the door is always open for all theories. And that's why I stayed away from making global IR exclusionary and say, to hell with realism, liberalism, and constructivism. That's not the case. Finally, very quickly, non-Western, sorry, I took a note, but I kind of forgotten about this. What was the last question?
What were you? What were the
me, yeah. Well, when I got elected as the president, it was a big surprise. I was at an airport catching a flight in actually India, Calcutta, that the executive director called me to say that you have been elected. And so my first thought was, how do I seize this moment, really, to create something? Because a lot of presidents of International Studies Association, you have basically 1 year, okay? So this is just 1 year that you have. You're not the administrative leader. The executive director runs the show, but you are the intellectual leader. You set the agenda. You get to organize the conference, big conference. So I have one shot. So what do? Do I do a lot of institutional stuff, which a lot of presidents say they create committees, subcommittees? I didn't create a single committee. I said, I'll create an idea. And that's the global IR idea. So I spent a lot of my time as president, you go around giving lectures all over the place. I went to Mexico, I went to Europe, and other places promoting this idea. How I felt personally, I kind of felt kind of vindicated, isn't it? That you have been working on this theme for some time and finally people are waking up to it. So when I was given farewell as president after 1 year, after organizing what was the largest conference of ISA in New Orleans in 2015, my successor, a guy called Paul Deal, he said, usually the incoming president says nice things about the outgoing president. So he started by saying that in 20 years time, nobody will remember you. Okay, that's a great way to say it. So everybody's looking. And then said, not because, no, because this idea of global IR that you have pushed for so hard will become so common, so normal, that people will forget where it came from. And but it will be there in the literature, it will make an impact in the journal. So the legacy of the idea will stay. Maybe the creator of the idea will be forgotten. And maybe that is what is happening now. I mean, although I do feel that I get a lot of due recognition for some of the work I've done, but a lot more people have taken this up. It has become more and more mainstream, more and more common. And maybe he was right that in another 10, 15 years, it's not 20 years yet, 20 years will be 34. So nobody will remember me. I may be dead by then, but this idea would have become so common. And this is the other thing I tell people, that there is this turf battle among academics, you know. So some people call it non-Western, post-Western, worlding of IR. So no, there's no agreement, but they do basically the same thing. And so I said, I don't care whether you call it global IR or not. No, as long as you do what I'm hoping that you'll do, broaden, redefine IR to make it more inclusive. So as I should quote Deng Xiaoping, the Chinese leader, since you mentioned Xi Jinping, Deng Xiaoping used to say that probably quoting from a Chinese proverb, it doesn't matter whether a cat is black or white as long as it kills mice. Okay, so what's in a name, global IR, as long as people believe the idea that international relations has been too narrow for too long, it has for too long excluded the voices, experiences of non-Western societies, and it's a high time we change that. Otherwise, international relations is doomed. Its future is doomed as a discipline. All right, so
the slides coming.
Yeah. That's not the last one, is it? It's a bit.
Yeah, la última, por favor.
Oh, it's coming. Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to tell you that those of you who are worried about studying indigenous societies and culture, you should be careful. So my suggestion has been that you can't develop a theory in one person. You have to have a critical mass. A critical mass is having a whole bunch of scholars. So it cannot be one or two scholars. Secondly, your theories must be able to travel. So dependency theory was popular because it was adopted by African scholars, Asian scholars. So I tell this to my Chinese colleagues, that you can have a Chinese IR that only explains Chinese foreign policy. You should have concepts that explain the whole world. And they have started doing that. Then the third is maintain some distance from governments. You cannot completely stay away from policy. Americans do it all the time. There is a revolving door between American foreign policymakers and American scholars. But they will criticize if Chinese did that or Indians did that. But you should maintain some distance. You should have, you should be able to, if you criticize governments, you may get into trouble. But there are a lot of other ways of doing IR without having to do anything with governments. Maintain a little bit of distance, and at the same time, be very passionate about it. So that's what I was trying to say, that there are challenges for global IR when you build in indigenous societies, indigenous concepts, but as long as you have an exportable theory. For example, the English school is not about England. It's a English school of IR, is about the whole world. So if there is an Ecuadorian school, it should be about the whole world and not just about one country, one region. Where is the picture of mine? The last slide. I will conclude that. Is that the one? Okay. So that's the most interesting thing I did apart from this.
Bueno, esto ha sido todo por hoy en esta conferencia magnífica. Thank you very much, Professor Acharya. We enjoy a lot your conference and we learn a lot, by the way. Les agradecemos mucho por haber venido esta tarde, noche aquí. Les decimos que mañana el 7º Congreso de la Red de Ciencia Política y Relaciones Internacionales continúa. Hay muchos paneles muy interesantes en los que ustedes pueden participar, pueden concurrir. Ahora vamos a cambiar de sede y vamos a celebrar los 50 años del Instituto de Altos Estudios Nacionales que se encuentra ubicado frente a la plataforma gubernamental en la avenida Amazonas y Diguja. Villalengua, perdón, sí, Diguja era antes. En fin, bueno, les invitamos a seguir las actividades que realiza CIPRI a nivel nacional e internacional. Esta es la más visible. Hay conferencias, hay otro tipo de talleres, de trabajos más puntuales. Además, les invitamos también a todos los que no conocen la Universidad Andina Simón Bolívar, Sede, Ecuador. Estamos celebrando 30 años, así que pueden venir a visitarnos cuantas veces quieran, a conocer. La universidad tiene unas instalaciones muy lindas, un campus muy lindo que ustedes pueden ver ahí muchas horas de arte y demás. Nosotros siempre estaremos muy gustosos de recibirlos aquí. Esta es su casa, es la casa de la comunidad andina, es la casa de ustedes y, en fin, es la casa de CIPRI, es la casa de Flaxo también, es la casa de la American University. Así que esperamos pronto y les deseamos todo lo mejor. Esperamos mañana en la continuación del Congreso de la Red CIPRI. Diego.
Sí, muchísimas gracias a todos, muchísimas gracias a la UID por estar acá, igualmente a los señores oficiales de Fuerza Aérea, Marina y el Ejército. Gracias a todos por estar acá. Como decía Michelle, el día de mañana continuamos en el IAEN, tenemos varias actividades, creo que una de las actividades importantes de mañana es un conversatorio que tenemos con periodistas para analizar el estado de situación del país, eso es a las 11:30. Y hacia la tarde hay varias actividades más que no les voy a detener para contarles ahora, pero también hacia la tarde a las 18 horas tenemos una conferencia magistral por Constanza Macina que nos acompaña hoy acá sobre democracia y autocracia en América Latina, nuevos y viejos desafíos. Eso y una serie de actividades más que las van a encontrar en las redes sociales de CIPRI, así es que confiamos en verlos a todos mañana. Un fuerte abrazo y buenas noches. So great, so interesting.